points out that if you live in a community, say in one of these Far Eastern countries where Christians and Jews and Muslims have lived, alongside each other and actually intermarried, and not a problem, there's more tolerance than when they're your neighbors. But when outsiders come in, when the Christian crusaders come in and say, this is what we believe in and this is what we're going to do, those who identify themselves as Christian then become part of the outsiders, and then they get turned on. So it is this outsider approach once we go into these countries that totally destroys the fabric of their society, where they were much more tolerant until we got there.
Myself, I don't think it's any coincidence that the U.S. has targeted the secular Arab regimes, the non-fundamentalist regimes, whether we're talking Iraq or Syria or even Egypt, and has been involved in installing the most radical Islamic elements. And that's because, of course, empires like the U.S. benefit when they can divide and conquer, when they can cause trouble, when they can cause people hating each other and fighting each other internally. It's more easy for the empire to control things. Yeah,
that was certainly true when the Iranians were moving toward democracy and had a democratically elected leader in the 50s. We throw him out and put in a dictator, and that leads to the radicalization, and now look at what we have running Iran. And that was a consequence of us interfering with a secular state that would have been more tolerant.
And how protective they are of the Saudi Arabian dictatorship, which is one of the most vicious dictatorships, just like Bahrain. But nobody seems to mind that.
Yeah, and then you see the Saudis right now want to really come down. That means the United States has to come down real hard on the Iranians because they were threatening to kill their ambassador. But under that kind of logic, how come we didn't come down very hard on the Saudis when 15 of their people came and attacked us and killed all those people on 9/11? But no, what did we do? The bin Laden family that still remain in this country, we ushered them out of the country and made sure they got back to Saudi Arabia without even asking them any questions. So I don't know how they get away with such inconsistencies, but and it's probably mostly because of the propaganda that goes through the major media that lets them get away with it.
Ron, one of the few times they allowed you to speak at that last debate, you skewered Herman Cain, who of course is former Fed official, longtime pro-Fed, anti-audit the Fed, doesn't like the Fed being criticized, defends, Alan Greenspan is a great guy. You asked the right question, and I don't know if I want to say he lied, but he certainly gave an incorrect answer in response to you. He didn't tell the truth.
There was no doubt about it. And you know that I don't enjoy personalizing any of this stuff, but one reason why that was a lot easier is because he was quoted quite frequently in the media of being very, very nasty to those many young people who have been strong supporters of the gold standard and anti-Fed and has supported me. So that was really what was under my skin at that time because, being in politics, you get hammered all the time, and I try to just let that go by. But he's probably one of the ones that have attacked our support. As a matter of fact, he had made some nasty remarks about me as well. So I think that was probably the reason. But it was also appropriate because it's a very important issue. Because he's bragging about being the non-politician. How political do you think you have to be appointed to the Fed? I mean, that's about as political as you get. Matter of fact, that's more powerful politics than it is getting elected to an office.
That's right.
So he's pretending to be this outsider. Also, the annoying thing about the Cain proposal is certainly this idea, and I had this in mind that if I had more time I would have asked that, and I went back and forth on what to ask him, but I chose the Federal Reserve. This whole idea of if he had his way, he would go down in history as the person that started the national sales tax without touching the income tax, and this would be such a dramatic change from this, and yet most Americans don't want a national sales tax on top of the income tax, but so far he's getting a lot of pretty good publicity for that, and the media has been pumping him up.
Although I did notice his typical deer in the headlights look when he was asked who his economic advisors was, and of course he has none, but I thought I was wishing that they could have asked you that question because, of course, you're your own economic advisor. You've read everything, you know all this, you're the one guy in public life who really understands real economics.
Yeah, that reminds me of when they asked Romney a question on his military. What would you do on this sort of thing? He says, well, I would check with my generals. And, I suggested very strongly at that debate, I said, but I thought the president was supposed to be the commander-in-chief, to make these decisions. But, but there are, I'm certainly open to advice and explanations. I think we all have to continue to learn, so that is important. But I appreciate the compliment that you give me for saying I do understand a little bit about economics anyway.
Boy, you are an economist. I mean, you may not have the degree, but you are an economist, and I can't tell you how thrilling it is to have you talk about the business cycle, about central banking, about all the various things the government does, and what the inevitable results of them are, that they can't actually violate the laws of reality, and that more of these Keynesian spending programs. I'll just end up with one thing I heard David Frum, who is not a Ron Paulian, shall we say, on television yesterday representing the Republican position on a question, and he said, he's slightly alarmed because, of course, the one key jobs program we need is a massive increase in money creation and credit creation. He said, but he was concerned that there were elements, primitive economic elements, people who believed in a primitive monetary policy, who were against a massive explosion, additional explosion in money and credit, so he was worried it might not happen. Well, This was, of course, a backhanded tribute to you, because, of course, you have awakened people. You have opened their eyes to what not only is this bad economically, but it's a rip-off, that what the Fed is doing is ripping off regular people for the benefit of the big banks.
Isn't it amazing that they don't reconcile it with the current news, even today, that real incomes are down about 8% in the last 10 years? Who does that hurt the most? The poor and the middle class. And yet it's precisely because they advocate and have been practicing this whole thing about just, we'll increase money and credit so that we can finance debt, and this will take care of the middle class, and we'll give them all these programs. At the same time, their standard of living goes down. It proves the Austrian viewpoint and Mises' viewpoint that inflation, destruction of currency, always destroys the middle class, and there's a transfer of wealth from the middle class and the poor over to the rich. And of course, I think this is something that we have to really work at and trying to explain these people who are complaining about Wall Street, that they complain about the right things on Wall Street and not just from complaining about people who are making a good income.
And of course, as you've pointed out a while ago as well as now, the American family's income is down ever since Nixon abolished the last remnants of the gold standard, and the Fed was empowered to print as much money as it wanted to print.
Yeah, that was unleashing it.
Dr. Ron Paul, thank you, and thanks. Keep up the good work, and keep up your writing and your speaking, and you're our champion. So
thank you, Lew.
We're all cheering you. Bye-bye. Well, thanks so much for listening to the Lew Rockwell Show today. Take a look at all the podcasts. There have been hundreds of them. There's a link on the upper right-hand corner of the LRC front page. Thank you.